Hey guys, Simisdim here, back with another Airsoft review. This time, it's the Tokyo Marui M4A1 Recoil Shock. This wasn't supplied by any of my sponsors, however it was supplied by my good friend Airsoft Alamo. I'm going to put a link to his channel in the description below, so thank you for letting me review this, mate. As always in my reviews, we're going to go over the following things. We're going to go over what you get in the box, my initial impressions, a range and chrono test, and then my rating out of 10. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the review. Let's just go over a brief history, as we always do in my reviews, this time of the M4A1. It's no secret that the M4A1 is one of the most popular and well recognized assault rifles on the planet, being used for a number of years by a lot of different nations, most notably the United States. The M4A1 is actually a carbine version of the M16 family of rifles. What that means, it has a collapsible 6-position stock and a shorter barrel than the M16, making it a little bit more useful in certain types of environments such as close quarter battle and urban. Another great feature of the M4, it's highly customizable. You can add things like grenade launchers, optics, different stock options as well. In my opinion, it's easy to see why it is a mainstay in a lot of different nations' armies. But enough about the brief history of the M4A1, let's jump on to the Tokyo Marui Airsoft version. So here's what's in the box. Pretty standard from Tokyo Marui, you essentially get a manual, an unjamming rod, a mid-cap magazine, which is specific to the recoil shock system, and you get the gun itself. Nothing really extra to explain. The box art is always nice on Tokyo Marui products, but that's all I can really say. So not much on the what's in the box. So my initial impressions of the M4 is it's really light. Now I personally own a Tokyo Marui Scar Heavy recoil shock, and that is a lot heavier. I know the recoil engine in the Scars is quite beefy compared to the ones in the M4. However, I wasn't actually expecting it to be as light as it was out of the box. The build quality when I got my hands on it was usual Tokyo Marui. It's what I've come to expect from any Tokyo Marui product. Very plasticky but solid in its build, so I was quite impressed there. Ergonomically, it's an M4, so nothing new and fancy there. It's what's inside in this offering that counts rather than the aesthetics outside. Its functionality is amazing. The bolt locks when the magazine is empty, and when you put a fresh one in you have to hit that bolt release, otherwise you can't fire. I really like that. That's just a great feature in my opinion all airsoft guns should have moving forward. Now let's move on to some of the features of the Recoil M4A1. It has a bunch of them. I'm not going to spend loads of time on this, but I'm just going to give you some of the key features. Let's start with the handguard. The handguard on this M4A1 is actually the battery compartment. Unlike other Recoil M4s which have small battery compartments, such as the CQB-R version, this one has rather ample battery space, and you don't need any specific batteries like you do with the CQB-R, which has a specific crane stock battery. So that's a great feature. It means you can use any of your batteries that you have. I would always recommend using 7.4 LiPos in any TM recoil. Now let's move on to the second feature, and that is the stock portion. It's a standard 6-position M4 stock and buffer tube. Because it's not rear wired as well, you don't have to have specific stocks on there that you need to either get to the wiring or take off, so you're free to add any stock option you want. However, if you were buying this platform to turn it into an M16, you're not actually able to take the buffer tube off, because that's where the recoil system is. You can, with modding, mod an M16 stock to do this, but it's not something you can easily do. Let's move on to the final point. I've highlighted the receiver area, but it's not actually the receiver itself I want to talk about. It's the functionality of the gun, and that was just the easiest part to highlight. The functionality of the gun is great. Its manipulation is similar to that of a real M4. When the magazine is empty, your gun will lock back. You then need to put a new magazine in and hit the bolt release. If you don't, your gun will not cycle. So that is a very, very good feature if you want a more realistic approach to airsoft. The receiver itself is a standard M4A1 receiver. You can take the carry handle off also to reveal a 12 o'clock rail where you can add optic accessories. That being said, don't quote me when I said a standard M4A1 receiver. I believe if you want to swap it out, you'll need to then mod other receivers to make the TM internals fit. Just a little side note guys, if you are interested in getting an M16 stock modded to fit your TM recoils and you live in the UK, I am going to put a link to LCS Engineering. He actually offers this service, so there's going to be a link to him below, so do check that out. But now let's move on to the chrono and range test, starting with the chrono test. For this chrono test we're using 0.25 gram BBs, as this was what my friend was using. As I mentioned, it's my friend's gun. Also we're using a 7.4 LiPo battery which was charged to full.
2.5 BBs in here.
There we have it. There's 10 shots on the chrono on 0.25 gram BBs with a 7.4 LiPo for the Tokyo Marui M4A1 Recoil. Yes, it's quite low FPS, but it's quite consistent FPS. The total variance is 8 FPS. The low FPS is something I've come to expect with the stock Marui gun, just mainly for the fact that the laws in Japan means that their joules and FPS have to be quite low. And now let's move on to the range test. So on the range test I shoot from two distances. The first one is 10 to 20 meters, the second one is 20 to 35 meters, and I'm using 0.25 gram BBs, and it's quite a windy day with a left to right crosswind.
Still review yours.
No.
$6
You know, that sounds wicked through EarPro.
As you can see from the range test, it's very accurate at those distances. However, you can hear the BB takes quite a while to hit the target. That's due to the low FPS, but that's normally a standard thing with Tokyo Marui guns out of the box, like I mentioned earlier. It was very satisfying to flip it to full auto and finish off the mag, because the recoil sits in the buffer tube and it gives you a nice kick. Not as much as a GBBR, but enough to make it satisfying. Now let's move on to my final impressions. So my final impressions of the Tokyo Marui M4A1 Recoil Shock are as follows. When taking it out the box, it was what I expected, it being a Tokyo Marui product. It felt great, although a little bit toyish due to it being plastic. That didn't bother me so much. Shooting it, it felt great. The recoil, a little bit soft compared to what I'm used to, but the kick was satisfying. The functionality of the gun also is great. Being able to know when you're out of ammo without dry firing is great, and the added realism of having to hit the bolt stop when you've put a fresh mag in was really cool. The low FPS on Tokyo Marui guns out of the box doesn't bother me. Normally it just means you have to lead your shots a bit more, as the usual Tokyo Marui fairy dust in the hop chamber means you can outrange a lot of guns straight out of the box. The only gripe I have is this wouldn't be the model I would go for. I'm normally a fan of having a full wrist system on the forend of the gun. That's just a personal preference though. Everything else is nice. Now let's go over the pros and cons. As always, I'll start with the pros, and they are as follows. The gun feels great. It is quite light if you don't want a heavy gun, but you want a more realistic firing gun. This is the one for you. It being an M4, it's highly modular. You can keep it in this configuration, but if you want to add rails and other things like that, you can. Out of the box, it's very accurate. Standard Tokyo Marui there. You can literally outrange people quite easily with a stock TM gun. This is no exception. And the final pro is the battery space. Like I said earlier, it has ample battery space compared to some of the other TM Recoil M4 models, so that is a big pro. However, there are one or two cons. This is mostly going to be personal preference, as I really did struggle to find cons with this. Compared to some of the other Tokyo Marui models, this one does feel a little bit more toyish. That's due to a lot of plastic furniture. That is a personal preference con for me. Although a beautiful looking riff, it's not my personal choice. I do like the way M4s look stock, but I like mine a bit more kitted out. So I would have to go for a railed option or buy some aftermarket parts, but preferably I would go for one with rails already attached. So that was my pros and cons, guys. I had to be really picky with the cons. They do sound a little bit petty, but that's literally all I could think of that I didn't like about it. Otherwise, it's a fantastic riff. And now I'm going to give you my Pew rating out of 10 and explain why. So for the Tokyo Marui M4A1 Recoil Shock, I'm going to give it a well-deserved 9 out of 10. The main reason, you can literally take this thing out of the box and it'll outshoot a lot of other stock guns, which is great. It'll even outshoot some upgraded guns, so that is fantastic. In a sea of M4s, this one really does shine, but the reason I didn't give it a 10 out of 10 is literally because it's not aesthetically the M4 I would go for. Like I mentioned earlier, I would probably go for something like the CQB-R, because that's more up my alley. But yeah, that is literally the only reason why it doesn't get a 10. That's the end of my review of the Tokyo Marui M4A1 Recoil Shock. As always guys, thanks for watching. Do be sure to subscribe and click that bell notification, and check out the cards now.